This show has been brought to you in part by Bogart Extractors, an industry leader in hydrocarbon extraction. Over the last decade, Bogart has implemented many new technologies which have helped to revolutionize the way hydrocarbon extractions are performed. Each unit is made from sanitary stainless steel and is built and tested right here in the USA. Their certified systems for use in licensed facilities meet all NFPA and ASME standards and undergo peer review by a third-party engineer to ensure your facility and its employees can operate safely. Beyond simply making a functional extractor, Bogart has many additional features which make extraction using one of their machines a faster and more cost-effective process than would be possible on comparable machines from other manufacturers. These features include hydrocarbon falling films to supercharge evaporation rates, heavy-duty explosion-proof pumps for flammable liquid or vapor, industrial chillers capable of maintaining large tanks of solvent at temperatures well below negative 60 degrees centigrade, and more. Bogart can also offer extensive tech support and consultation services. Whether you need to set up an extraction lab from scratch or just need some replacement gaskets, give Bogart a call at 855-553-3887 or check out the website at www.bogart.com. Mishkin. Welcome to another episode of the Deadhead Cannabis Show. I was out last week, but it's nice to be back with my co-host, Rob Hunt, in San Diego, where I just was, and actually had the pleasure of visiting with Rob while I was down there and having a chance to catch up with him face-to-face for a change instead of just always seeing him in the fun in the sun. Rob, how are you?
I'm great, and Larry, that was a lot of fun. It was really nice to get a chance to see you and hang out and smoke a joint on the top of the hotel in San Diego, so that was a good way to spend a day, and great to catch up, meet your wife, meet some of your friends. So really, really enjoyable to see you and meet some other fellow Grateful Dead fans as you guys were sort of gallivanting around Southern California.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of fun. We went on that night to see the last show on the Eddie Vedder tour, and we could talk about that for hours. I'm a big Eddie Vedder fan, and I've always liked Pearl Jam. This show was just absolutely amazing, and this little it was basically a community theater in El Cajon that looked like walking into either a really nice high school or maybe a community college type of auditorium, with just one layer of seats, and Eddie was up on stage with all these guys, and man, they kicked ass all night. It was just, it was great music. And I have to give a shout out to my buddy Alex, who was with us on the trip and who had the musical karma and insight enough to be able to note that the show had previously been canceled and now was rescheduled for this night, which also happened to be the birthday of his wife, Andy Greenberg, another good friend of our show. And it was great to be with them and see great music. But today, we've got something very, very interesting planned, and I think, Rob, it's fair to say that this is part of the creative synergy that came out of you and I sitting up on the rooftop there for a little while and talking about the state of the world and other things while we enjoyed certain products. And although it's not normally our place to do a lot of talking on this show about politics or things like that other than how they affect marijuana, in this instance, given everything that's going on in the world, it's kind of hard to miss the significance of what's happening out there. So why don't you give everyone a brief little intro into our theme for today and how we got to it?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think for both you and I, it's a theme that means something on a personal level, simply because Morning Dew is a song that I think means so much to both of us. But from this, from the perspective of why Morning Dew, it's a song that obviously is very well associated with the Grateful Dead and has been since 1966. And it's been one of the only songs in their catalog that was never put away or shelved. It was there from the beginning. It was there all the way to the end. Many people I know would say that Morning Dew is their all-time favorite song at a show. It's the one that you were desperately hoping for coming out of space, to finish the show. But more importantly, from like a thematic perspective, it was written by a woman named Bonnie Dobson, and Bonnie Dobson, from what I understand, wrote the song after seeing the movie On the Beach, which is about the last survivors of basically full global annihilation after a nuclear holocaust. And the day that you and I were sitting up there, I think, was the day that Putin put the world on notice that he was putting his nuclear arsenal on high alert. And as we discussed, there's no such thing as low alert for a nuclear arsenal. If you have one and you've got a button and you've got the nuclear football that rides around with the president or the president of any nuclear armed nation, then there's no such thing as low alert. But since pre-1989, I don't think there's ever a time that we've seen where we had to think about it, or to think about it very much, that there's anyone out there that's potentially crazy enough to even think that. Yeah, I'm sorry. Why don't you talk for a minute there?
Yeah, no problem. And I get it, Rob. This is, look, the other thing we talked about, we're fathers, we're family men, we have friends, we have everything. And, we find ourselves in a really, really tricky moment here. And it's very unfortunate that, notwithstanding all the politics that, people are playing with it, you can't escape from the fact that it is a real life moment for all of us. And we hope, as with any time one of these types of issues come up, that cooler heads will prevail. But one of the things that we've always been very good about it as human beings, I think, is having the resources and the abilities to help ourselves kind of not just get through these times, but to actually comment on them and to try to take something out of them. And I think that that's what Bonnie Dobson did in this song when she wrote it originally. Is I hate to talk about something being artistic when it relates to such a sensitive topic, but she really took an artistic view, but I think it was artistic in the sense of trying to say to the world, hey, this is what's happening, and let's not lose sight of the seriousness of this. It's one thing to talk about a nuclear holocaust. It's another thing to realize it and to see where it leaves us on the back end. And I think in that regard, the song was very, very important in terms of being written, in that it, by becoming a part of almost folk tunes in the way it was first written by her, in a style that's very, very different from the way the Dead and Jerry wound up performing it. It's almost as though she is issuing a warning to the world. And I think it was probably a message that resonated at that time in the early 1960s, when the folk movement was very, very strong and was filled with people who were leaders in the thought movement with respect to being pacifists and being community people and really wanting to see the world be a better place, and staying away from war and kind of the mindless killing that goes along with it, and really understanding, hey, what can happen on the backside. And so I suppose in that regard, I would like to think in part because of what the song represents, but almost surely also because of the type of tune that it was, a folk tune, a tune that really kind of resonated, is probably why Jerry originally went after it. And I think it's fair to say, with all due respect to Bonnie Dobson, who, as the author and original performer of the tune, always deserves all the credit for it, but Jerry really made it his own. And Jerry put a stamp on this song and an image on this song that it's just not possible to turn away from it. And it's a soulful performance that sends the message that Bonnie Dobson wanted to send and does send, but I think from kind of a different perspective, and instead of almost being the harsh awakening of a crazy landscape that Bonnie Dobson sings about, Jerry sings about it in almost like a forlorn way, in an emotional way, that's saying, wow, this is really something we probably don't want to find ourselves in the middle of. And we never want to get to a point where we have to look to each other and say, it doesn't matter anyway. We need to react, and we need to be proactive, and all of these things prior to that. And I suppose in that regard, and again, still trying to avoid politics as much as possible, for people to come out and praise Putin and to say that the man's a genius and the man is this and the man is that, when this is the guy who's going to push a button and potentially change the world, is very problematic because it takes.
Well, I don't think it is political anymore. I mean, I think that what we're watching, unfortunately, like, look, you're right. There were certainly certain, politicians and certain newscasters or, TV personalities, I should better categorize them as, that, did come out in favor of Putin for a brief period of time. But I think in the last several days, watching what's happening, I don't think there's too many people left in his camp. And certainly on the world stage, there's nobody left in this camp. I mean, this is the best isolation.
Well, Donald Trump.
Sure. Look, his CPAC speech certainly was, and Tucker Carlson certainly made some comments. I think he'll, eventually regret that he ever made them. But from, the standpoint of, total isolation on the world stage, what's happening right now to Putin as a result of his just unprovoked aggression into Ukraine? Look, I think he set out to change the global political, create a global political shift, and I think he'll succeed. But I think he'll succeed in a very, very different way than he intended. And I think that, as he thought this is going to test the resolve of the West and it's going to, reclaim the glory of the former Soviet republic, I think what he's finding is each day he gets further into this, the further on an island he's put himself until he's, now approaching, the former Kim Jong-il status of North Korea, for that regime prior to passing it on to his son. Like the sanctions that are going in, these are different than anything the United States has ever done. They're different than anything any other country has ever done. Putin may keep some groups like the Belarusians or the Chechens that may remain on his side, but ultimately he's got a huge portion of the world that are just rejecting his politics and rejecting his aggression. And if you watch what happened at the UN Security Council meeting yesterday, where all but 3 countries got up and walked out on Sergei Lavrov, we've never seen that. We've never seen a time where the entire world essentially says, like, we're not having it, where they've closed their airspace to him, where yachts now are getting seized, where airplanes are getting seized, not just from Putin, but from every oligarch whose ill-gotten gains have been developed through the suppression of their people. And I think it's not without some outside chance that what's going to happen here ultimately will be that the revolution, the Navalny revolution that Putin has feared so much within his own country, is now sparked internally, where it's not even about Ukraine resisting the aggression and the world isolating Putin, but is this going to cause the Russian people to rise up and say enough's enough? I mean, so far 7,000 have been arrested already, and those numbers are going up on a daily basis. Are we going to achieve what we've wanted as a world for a while? And as I said, I started this off by saying I don't think it's political, in so much as I think that there's very, very few people on the other side of the aisle that I might sit on that disagree that this guy needs to be stopped. And at this point, it's clear.
Well, and you know what? I realize you guys will all be listening to this a few days after, but while we're sitting here taping it on Wednesday, March 2nd, last night was the State of the Union, and one of the things that really stood out to me was that on most of the statements that Biden made about the U.S. response to what was going on, he got applause from both sides of the aisle, and it was very heartening to see bipartisan support in that instance, and to know that even though many times we sit here and think, boy, how worse can this get for all of us, that there are still a few certain things where at least as far as the world is concerned, we stand united as a country, and notwithstanding the behavior of a few junior Republican members who are too junior to waste our time mentioning them by name, who thought it was time to turn to playground taunts. The Republican Party leadership, and even a lot of those who have been perceived by the left as difficult to work with, and that's what we want to see, and that's what we need to see, and let the world know that we may be a country that's divided on our own internal issues, but as far as the rest of the world is concerned, we're very strong, and we're going to send a message to people like Putin that proceed at your own risk, basically.
And I think that's not just us, but it's the 39 NATO countries. It's the rest of the Western world, countries that you never ever expected to be involved in getting putting their neck out on this, including Switzerland, who's been famously neutral now for their hundreds of years. Sweden and Finland, who never wanted to provoke Russia for fear of retaliation, are now supplying arms. There's been rumors for days now that the Polish Air Force is going to supply MiG-29s to the Ukrainians. Moldova's using their country to shuttle goods and services and ammunition. And the U.S. as of today is the day that we're taping this has now sent over Stinger missiles to make sure that there's better air defense against the Russians. So short of creating a no-fly zone right now in the Ukraine that would inevitably, trigger a much, much larger confrontation. I think the Western world is doing everything it can to show, like, look, this isn't just about set one foot on NATO soil, but it's also, we will do absolutely everything we can within our power without, stepping over the line and creating this conflict into something much greater. But again, we're not geopolitical experts out there. To anyone in our, Larry and I are attorneys and weed guys and music lovers, and there's a lot of other things we claim to be, but geopolitical scientists we are not. What we can tell you is, I think much like everyone out there in our audience, we're following this closely, and it just made it really, really appropriate to discuss, as a theme of this show, Bonnie Dobson's words. So, when we first started the show off, what you were listening to is from Freedom Hall in Kentucky on 6/18/74, which is an absolutely classic do, and I think everyone out there's got their own favorite versions of do.
But let me say this one thing about that, and because we are kind of doing it in this chronological order and really focusing on that, I'm not sure that there's another song in the Grateful Dead songbook, and maybe not too many other songs in all of rock and roll, that are so identifiable by playing one note. Jerry stands up there and plays that boom, boom, and before he even gets to it, everyone knows what it is. It's classic, it's amazing, and I think it's what part of builds the whole thing of the show. You're hoping, give me a do, and you hear that note, and at that moment you're like, yes, here we go, man, buckle up.
Well, which is why I chose the Freedom Hall one, because that one has, the quintessential bow before it goes into ba-da-dow, bow, bow, ba-da-na-na-na-na. And that first note, as you said, like, as soon as you hear it, you know it's going down. And sometimes, they wouldn't come into it as a standalone. They'd sort of trickle into it and play it out as something. But once in a while, you get one where it's just, the same way that first note is shakedown. The second you hear it, you know it's a shakedown. And that's the same thing with do. And with do, like, I think there's like a collective exhale from the entire audience by about the sixth or seventh note of that song, where you've kind of gotten over, like, all right, here we go.
For sure. Yeah, it's great because not only are you enjoying it, but, for anyone, and listen, if it's your first time hearing one, God bless, who wouldn't want to go back and be able to relive their first live do again. But, enjoy that. But by the second do, you're like the rest of us, where it's not only is it wonderful that they're playing the song, but, you can spend the whole song anticipating what's still to come within the song. It's just a great thing all the way around. And as we'll talk about more in a minute here, entire Grateful Dead shows are classified or defined, just by the mere fact that a do is played. It can save a bad show all night long. They've been off. Jerry's been forgetting words. Bobby's, doing whatever. Phil's out of tune. The drummers are not keeping beat. And all of a sudden you hear that note for Morning Dew and you're like, screw the rest of it, man. Now we're going to have some fun. And I can't really recall ever hearing Jerry go into a Morning Dew and not do well. I've never heard him forget the words in a Morning Dew. I've never heard him go in and stumble around with it. I think it's a very centering song for him. And when he's playing it, he's kind of in a zone, and the Deadheads feed off that energy that he brings to the table with it, both in the opening and, as you'll hear in a minute or two here, in other clips of other do's we have from other venues. And maybe why don't you go ahead and talk about what the next clip is going to be, and we can lead into that one and give people an idea of where the song goes once we get past the majestic opening.
Sure. Well, I mean, anyone knows the progression of the song knows that it sort of builds and builds and builds and builds. Really similar progression to maybe the way, like, I'm trying to think of other songs that do it. Scarlet, I guess, in some ways does it. But with do, it stays pretty mellow in the jams in between each verse, but it's not until there's two major jams, one that precedes the ending and one that's kind of in the middle. But either one could just set the world on fire. So the next one we're going to listen to, for me, like, there's a handful of ones that everyone points to and says your repertoire of tapes or CDs or now just streams isn't complete without them in the collection. Is from 1987 from MSG. which we've talked about the show before. To me, it's my favorite second set of the 1980s. It's the one that not as a Morning Dew, but it's the one that went into the Good Lovin' La Bamba Good Lovin', which was just, the Watchtower before the Dew is just amazing as well. But this Dew, I think, for the jam early on is about as good as it gets. So let's cue that one up and listen to a bit of that.
Guess it doesn't matter anyway.
Well, if there's any doubt whether or not New York fans like a good morning dew, that should dispel any notion on that. Yeah, Jerry comes out well, and what I love about that is we talk about Jerry showing the emotion of it, and that's not always a place where the emotion comes in. But you can hear it in his voice there. And of course, as you pointed out previously, once we were listening to the show and we were listening to the La Bamba, we were commenting as well on how much emotion and energy Jerry was pouring into that La Bamba. So it was clearly a good night for him. I can certainly see and understand why you or anybody would be raving about that show, and it's one that I'm sorry I missed, but it's just great. And when you hear that, and you're like, boy, and now we've got the final jam, and that part that we're listening to right there, in my mind, that's them kind of beginning to lay the final foundation for the final buildup that we get, to the big, kind of climactic moment at the very end of the tune, which we'll hear on the way out, and we'll talk about on the way out. But before we, get to all of that, let's go back and it seems appropriate, to maybe talk about some other dews that are out there, if for no other reason, because, to try and say that we can capture the essence of a morning dew with 3 clips would be kind of silly, even for guys like us. And, all you can do is find, great moments here and there, but everyone's seen a dew that they consider to be their very best morning dew ever. And, over the time, the tune has taken on different formats. And, one of the eras I think we have to look at certainly is the late 1960s, particularly by 69 and the time that, the Dead were working on Live Dead. And again, as we tape this today, this is the 53rd anniversary of the 4th and final night of the Dead's historic 4-night run at the Fillmore West, which was released as a box set a number of years ago. Often considered, one of the best 4-night runs of the Grateful Dead ever, just because they were at their peak in the psychedelic stage, and very, very many tunes from that show were eventually made their way over to Live Dead, which, of course, for many people remains kind of the pinnacle live album of the record era before we started taping things and all of that kind of stuff. And those shows were so important as well. But those morning dews were, almost a little bit different because, Jerry hadn't quite gotten on top of it yet. He didn't have that quite the same power drive that we see in some of these later versions. And it always strikes me that in some of those earlier versions, it almost sounds a little bit like the Bonnie Dobson version. Not quite getting there, but you can certainly hear it in there.
Right, yeah. I mean, those early versions were much, much folkier and a lot less, electric. They started getting, towards the end. The 66, 67 versions, they started migrating to be, kind of more psychedelic as well. But, I think, 68 was, I think, really where Dew came into its own. And by, 69 and 70, and 71, I've always loved that Fillmore East 429-71 Dew. Is just one of my all-time favorites. Then, the November 6th, 1970 Portchester Capitol Theater is another one that from that era that just stands out. But there's so many, sort of good ones that are really starting to show where the form of that song was going to take going forward. But, starting, I think, in 74, 75 is when you start getting the much more extended, closings with a sound that I think we're more used to. It wasn't, kind of that old Fender sound that he had in the 60s, and started progressing to a much different tone in the Dew. But I love looking back, and as I said, it's one of the few songs that stayed in the catalog all the way through. So watching the progression and watching sort of how they interpreted the song until and many people I think would say like the 77, 78 was the crescendo of the do. But so I don't know Larry, like how soon, like after you started seeing the Dead, like I got to see it do my first show. Like how many shows did it take you before you actually got to do?
Let's see. It took me. I want to say it was my fourth show in Madison, Wisconsin. Although I would have to definitely go back and double check it. That would have been in 1983. And it was, it was great. At that point, everything that they played was new and amazing to me. And it was, all very wonderful. I would say that not the first do, but certainly one of the do's that I heard that early on, or I guess, in my Dead career was in, the last night of the Dead did a 4-night run, 4 shows in 5 nights at Alpine Valley in 1988, and just one amazing show after another. For us, that was home base. So even though we had to schlep up to Wisconsin, leaving from the North Shore, it wasn't quite that bad, and we always had places to go and stay. And our good friend Deanie often let her parents' house be our home base with a fun swimming pool in the backyard and all that good kind of stuff. But that morning dew that night was just amazing. And as Jerry's playing it, everybody's completely focused on him. We were lucky to be inside the pavilion, and we were on Jerry's side of the stage, looking down on him. And he's in his little familiar, almost kind of hunched over thing where he's looking down at his guitar. And, you're just amazed that this guy who doesn't move at all, that these amazing sounds are coming out of his guitar. And all of a sudden, we all noticed what would have been to us to the right, but to Jerry to his left, up on the edge of the stage, and the stage at Alpine Valley kind of stretched out a little bit beyond where the performers stood, and then eventually kind of narrowed. Some deadhead, some guy who looked like your standard deadhead with a tie-dye shirt and the baggy jeans and the long hair all over the place, had made his way up onto the stage and taken 3 or 4 steps towards Jerry and then just stopped. And he was standing there watching Jerry in much the same way that the rest of us were, but he was up on the stage. And at one point we noticed Jerry briefly glance up over his glasses and look at him, and Jerry just kept on playing. And this guy just, was like, he was in awe, we were in awe of the whole scene. And I don't remember if it was Steve Parrish or one of the guys who was definitely a Grateful Dead guy and not a local security guy or a local cop, walked over to this guy. They put their arm around his shoulder. They just kind of gently walked him off the stage. Jerry looked over for just a second to see, what was going on, and then just dived right back in and, thundered through the rest of the show with the crowd going wild that, that this guy it was kind of like, what every deadhead would like to do at that moment. You want to be close to Jerry and feeling that energy, zooming off of him while he's in the midst of an amazing do. And I'm sure if this guy was on hallucinogens or anything, the buzz was that much better. But to know that, you're not going to get tackled and tossed aside like, you might in some other types of shows by the security that would be there. And, surely, that's not the way the Hells Angels would have necessarily handled the situation. But, it was a perfect way to handle it. And the crowd, I think, was as appreciative of that as they were of the fact that, it was just such a great morning dew. But that one stands out and is really hard to get away from. You can find it on YouTube, and someday maybe they'll release some of those shows. But that was a do for the ages.
I think everyone remembers the dues that were really exceptional. And for me, I think there was a handful of them in the spring of 1992 that were fantastic. I think 3/9/92 from the Cap Center in Landover, Maryland, where they ended the show and then played Satisfaction as an encore was pretty damn good. And then to close that tour, they played 2 nights, which you probably went to, Larry, at the Palace of Auburn Hills in late March 23rd, I think, 92. It was another amazing watchtower into a do with a Gloria encore. And those, 92 again wasn't really known for the best shows, but that was there's definitely some spectacular highlights in Morning Dew. Probably the best ones I saw were during that tour.
1985, I was at the 20th anniversary shows at the Greek Theater, and the first night, second set, they came out and opened with a Morning Dew, and I had never seen that at all. And when you go back and you listen to some of the 68, 69, it wasn't all that rare, but for me, it was just amazing that an entire set would start off from a do, because I always saw a do as kind of like being the soft blanket that you land on at the end of the, a crazy night of rocking and rolling to whatever they're doing, and they just kind of give you this to help bring you down, so that you can be at a more reasonable frame of mind as you walk out the door. But it was great to see them open a second set with it, and the crowd loved it, and it created great energy. And another really good one is from a show that hopefully we'll be talking about in a couple of weeks here, one of my favorite shows and one of my favorite second sets of the 1980s, and that's from April 6, 1982 at the Philly Spectrum. And it's just an amazing second set. We won't talk about all of it now, other than to say that they come out of the drums into a Bobby Truckin', into a Bobby Other One, and then into a Jerry Do. And again, with one of those, telltale first note drops, and the entire crowd just goes wild. And after such a great night of songs, they're being treated to this morning dew. And that's, I think, for a lot of people, and this will be a good bridge into our final clip, at least, that we won't necessarily listen to yet, but we'll set the table for. When you talk about how a dew can really set the stage, a show that has nothing else going for it, a morning dew can make a difference. But this Philly show, for instance, was a solid show, and would have been a solid show even if they had gone into Black Peter or Stella Blue. But the fact that they went into morning dew kind of elevated it up, one step up the rung, that, it was solid opener and solid, and then, in everybody's perfect dead set list, is there anybody out there who doesn't have morning dew as the final Jerry ballad, deep in the second set, post drums and space? And so when they pull it out, it really makes it wonderful. We were just thrilled to see, as you're listening to that show, and boom, there it is. It's really, really good, and it's a great show, and I think we'll talk about that in a few weeks.
Well, and I think, that's the other thing about the difference between going on tour and just seeing like one or two shows as one-offs. If you did that, and you caught a couple of nights, you were really hoping you'd get a do, but, you couldn't be guaranteed you'd get one. But if you were actually on tour, and you're like, okay, the first night of tour was a Wharf Rat, the next night was a Peter, the next night was a Standing on the Moon, the next night was a Stella, then you knew, like, each night you're like, okay, my chances of getting due are that much higher with each subsequent night, where you're just counting it down, going, okay, this is now the fifth or sixth night of tour and there hasn't been a due yet, that, like, you're more excited for the next night knowing that the last 3 or 4 nights didn't have one, and I can't think of another song where I could think of where, like, for me, it was crossing songs off the list to say how much closer to due am I, and that's the way I always felt about it. And and the crazy part is, like, thematically, like, for like we've talked about this, that you and I think, pay probably more attention to the music than we do to the lyrics of most songs. Like, for me, musically, it's like, that's why we're jam band guys, right? It's not that we don't focus on lyrics, or we'd be indie guys, right? Or pop guys. But it's not to say that, like, the lyrics aren't like an exceptionally major part of the song. They are to me, but the story I think is always told through the music. And with Dew, there's very few other songs where I can think of the Dead covered like a theme that was that serious, and I think you had it with China Doll. I think, Standing on the Moon certainly has it with, war in general, but nothing as heavy as Dew, and I don't know.
Even Throwing Stones, which was ostensibly kind of a political song, but none of those foretell, life after the destruction of civilization the way this one does, and I think that really makes it ring true for people in a certain way, that it's like almost nice to hear the story, because if you're hearing the story, that means you're not living the story, and and Jerry can just come out and do it in a way that is special musically, and is special in every way he touches upon it. And one thing I do want to touch on, because we'll let the cat out of the bag in our final clip in a few minutes after we take care of some other business, will eventually be from the Barton Hall show in '77, which, of course, this is the question that Rob and I were kicking around the other day. Barton Hall '77, great show, no question about it. It's considered, maybe the greatest Dead show of all time. And now that I have it on CD and I can listen to it, I understand why people would say that. It's certainly an amazing show, but far and away, as good as everything else is in that show,
it's the Dew.
It's the Dew. It's the Dew that stands out. And it's not even just the do, it's the final 3 minutes of the do, of which we're going to hear about the final minute and a half. And that's the sound. That's what everybody takes as they walk out of that place, was this amazing do. And it almost makes me wonder sometimes if people don't go back and say, oh my God, that do was, yes, it was the best show of all time, or was it the best do of all time? Because it could have been the best do of all time without being the best show of all time. I wasn't there. I can't judge it, fairly enough. But it's certainly, one of the, if not the most famous morning dews that the Grateful Dead play. And as you'll hear in a few minutes, deservedly so. But
if you've been listening to the show, you know that since we started introducing a little bit of musical clips into the show, we usually try to keep them to like 25, 30 seconds, just to illustrate kind of what was being played and how they were playing and what the sound was and who was doing what. You can't edit 30 seconds of that Barton Hall do. I mean, so there's absolutely no way we can provide 30 seconds, without just going. There's no place to stop where it's just not, completely and totally in the middle of the crescendo of a peak, during that entire ending. So when I kept trying to find different places to start it or stop it, and technically I think you're not supposed to play other people's music for too long, but at a certain point, I don't think given where we are in the world right now, that there's any person in the Grateful Dead organization that would have an issue of us playing a longer portion of Morning Dew based on just kind of what's happening in the world.
No, I think you're right, and it's important because even in these moments, and obviously, Rob, these are very like we said, important issues, and they strike all of us very hard and in different ways. And yet, while Morning Dew can remind you of that, to hear the entire tune, but especially, a beautiful ending, and especially a beautiful ending like Barton Hall, I think really kind of sends you on your way with a little bit of hope and, a feeling that, the warning is, as deep and dire as the warning might be, it's just a warning. And, we're out there trying to, keep the world together and in one place, and hopefully people would do it. And who knows, maybe if we could get it translated into Russian and send it over to Putin and he listened to it, it might make a difference. You never know.
Yeah, I mean, look, and that's the thing. I mean, for me, when you think about the lyrics of songs, even though thematically they're very similar, Standing on the Moon to me is a song of hope. That's a song of hey, everything's fucked up, but, it's fixable. Do to me is not. Do to me is resignation. It's we're past that. We blew it.
Right. By the time we get into Morning Dew, right. By the time you get into the what's happening with Morning Dew, we're long past that situation. There's no question about it. But again, anytime we tell a story of woe and despair, I think it's human nature, to try to find a way to put some sort.
Right. Well, the art is the warning. That's the beauty of it. Is it's being written before you have to say that there's resignation, and it's preventative. It's a prophylactic to what could happen. But once in a while you remember there's assholes out there that don't look at it that way. To them, it's the world isn't something that is shared. It's something that they believe is theirs.
Right, or certainly that they are, for whatever reason, that of all the human beings that have ever walked this planet, that somehow they've been the ones anointed to think that if they want to push a button and end civilization, they not only have a right to do so, but maybe that they were destined to do so. And that's certainly been our concerns with all the various, Kim family members in Korea, North Korea, for quite some time. But I think that was always tempered by the fact that we've never been given any reason to truly believe that they have the technology to pose a viable threat, or at least a threat that will be keeping us up at night. Whereas Russia, we've all learned from the day we were born, unfortunately for our generation, that they are out there and that they're a reality. And I mean, in fact, I was born within a few weeks of the Bay of Pigs, and who knows, things go a little bit differently one way or the other there, and maybe I'm not. So, you can't escape those moments and take them for granted. But by the same time, I think, and one of the things I always loved about Jerry was kind of that he tried to put a positive spins on things. When he sings Dear Mr. Fantasy, instead of, sing us a song to take us out of this gloom, he always sing us a song to keep us out of this gloom. He's already on the positive side of it. We're not living in gloomy times, man. We're talking about them maybe, but we're on the positive side, and that's where we want to stand. That's where we want to be. And
that's a great point.
And I always loved hearing that. And I think the same thing here, that the emotional ending that he gives us allows the Deadheads and everybody for a minute to kind of let go of the deeper message of the song and just kind of revel in the moment that Jerry creates for us and take something positive out of there as we walk out the door.
Yeah. And then look, I want to make sure that we're clear that I don't think either you or me believes that nuclear holocaust is happening anytime soon, despite the fact that they're saber rattling. And it bothers me to no end that some asshole out there thinks it's okay to even consider threatening, right? In any way.
Right. Well, look, our generation, relatively speaking, has been very lucky in that we have not, had to sit and face down very many situations where, there was a real, credible threat of somebody being crazy enough to use nuclear weapons. But, certainly Vladimir Putin and the mere fact that he's undertaken this campaign and all of the nonsense that he spews out to try to justify everything that he's doing, all of a sudden has to make anyone stop and think for a moment at least, whether this man is in fact capable of taking that next step. And we listed all the things that all the countries in the world are doing to help, and for some of those countries, Putin has already issued a warning that if you do that, you can expect our response to possibly even be nuclear level. And I think a lot of these countries are calling his bluff on that to some degree at least. And while I hope it doesn't get into a dangerous situation or anything like that, where it becomes credible, it's nice to know that people are basically saying to him, look, we're not going to let you hold us hostage. We're not going to just sit by and let this be business as usual. And, we live in a world now that, for better or for worse, and maybe in this case for better, is so interconnected that, as you and I were talking about, Rob, it's possible to hear directly from the people on the ground and to avoid altogether the propaganda machines that are trying to feed us whatever story they want us to believe.
And by the way, the noise that you guys just all heard on the podcast right now that piped in for a second, I apologize for, was me actually trying to pull something up that I was going to share with the audience, which is, there are some mediums out there that aren't, your traditional news organizations. They're instead people that are on the ground that are trying to get the word out of what's happening in Ukraine directly. And, one that I'd point to that I've just found to be an exceptional resource is on Clubhouse, and the room is called The Big Picture. And that room has now been opened for 6 straight days without a single second of closing the room down. It's averaged over 1,000 people at a time in that room. Over 250,000 people have tuned into that room. And the entire goal of that room is onefold, and that's to provide accurate information of what's happening. It has to be verified information. If it's conjecture, if it's not confirmed by multiple news sources that are reliable, they don't talk about it. Someone else tries to bring it up, they'll shut it down and say, sorry, that's unconfirmed. We don't have confirmation on that yet. But it's curated by 20 different tech professionals and other people that work either in the UN or work in other government agencies. But they've just gotten together and decided, hey, this needs to be done. Someone needs to do it. And they're calling not just from U.S. media, not just from British media, but directly from media sources all over Eastern Europe. And in fact, there's plenty of people from Ukraine that are continuing to go into that room and saying, hey, I'm in Kyiv right now, or I'm in Kharkiv right now, and this is what's happening. This is what we're seeing real time. And on top of that, they're also providing information on if you want to get involved and you want to donate, here are the organizations that can do it. We don't talk about too much, but guys like Jose Andres, who is just done exceptional work in feeding people that are in war zones or after major tragedies. There's a ton of different ways that people out there can get involved outside of just saying go U.S. sanction the hell out of these guys. But if you actually want to be directly involved, there's 5 or 6 million refugees that are now leaving Ukraine for Poland and for other parts of Western Europe that need to get fed. We talk about the war and the damage of war right now. We're 6 days into it. It's going to get a hell of a lot worse, and the humanitarian crisis and the disruption of the food supply and the disruption of the water supply and the disruption of everything else that's about to happen to these major cities, it is going to be catastrophic.
Yeah, I agree. Something's got to be done. There's no question about it.
So find the thing you want to support. Find it and figure out a way to start. Donating. Find a way to donate your time. If nothing else, find a way to listen to what's happening on the ground so you can truly educate yourself and not just hear what CNN wants you to see or what Fox wants you to see. it's great. They've got some human interest stories here and there, and they focus on one family and a little girl who's hugging her mother as the father gets on the train. I get it. Those stories, they touch you emotionally. But hearing the real voices of the real people in real time as they're actually explaining to you what it's like to be in a bomb shelter in Kyiv.
Pretty powerful stuff. And, until you've actually listened to it, you can't really imagine it. And, I appreciate you sharing that with us too, Rob, because, it's important for those of us that haven't made that connection on Clubhouse yet and understood what some of those resources are that are available to us in this very, hyperlinked and connected world. And the stories that have been coming out about the way people have used the internet, both for purposes of communication as well as for purposes of disrupting the Russian logistics efforts, has been nothing short of amazing. And I think that when all is said and done and people have the time to go back and really revisit and write about what happened during these times, we're going to find about a lot of people who, through their bravery and courage to keep the rest of the world informed and up to date, helped avoid a situation where somebody like Putin could shape the argument and the dispute however he wanted, because the other voices just couldn't be heard. So certainly to people who are interested in it, please tune in.
Yeah, and I'll say that as powerful a medium as like Facebook is or Instagram or Twitter is, nothing, like literally when it comes to this kind of content, nothing is more powerful than the human voice.
True. And it's the human voice, whether the human voice is talking, whether the human voice is singing, which, again, inevitably takes us back to Jerry, and, the ability to do what he does in such a profound way. And, many a night have I walked out of a show after a do like that with tears in my eyes, and I've seen the people next to me and all over the place. It's hard not to, because you do kind of get that raw mixture of doom and dread, of emotion, of beautiful soulful music, as well as for most of us, except the night when it opened the show, that, oh my God, this means the show is almost over if they're into morning dew now. But nevertheless, it was always great, and we all had our morning dew T-shirts that were the takeoff on Mountain Dew and all that kind of stuff, and it was mandatory to have it, and the game was always to try to wear it the night when they played a dew. And of course, the way the dead world works is any night you're expecting to hear a song, you're usually not going to hear it, and you have to go in thinking, forget about it, or not even thinking about it, and then all of a sudden, lo and behold, there it is.
Yeah, I mean, you and I had some great some cannabis news to discuss, but honestly, I think after the show we've just done, I don't think it's necessarily all that appropriate. Yeah, I think we can table it.
No, and you know what? Look, it's cannabis news, and while cannabis news is great to talk about, in terms of what's happening on the world stage, it really kind of loses its importance right now, except, I will say, for its ability to provide those who use it with perhaps a slightly more calming and relaxed attitude as we try and sit here and assess what's going on with the world, and still be able to function and sleep and do all of those kind of things. And so certainly, to be in a state where it's legal to come, having just been out in California for a week, where it's more than legal, it's kind of like the tap water almost.
You smoke weed on rooftops.
And right, beautiful. Well, like I told you that moment, people can laugh at this, they can say whatever they want, but there is something that's much different about smoking weed outdoors in California, especially there up on the top of a peak after a wonderful 45-minute climb with good friends or wherever it might be, that just kind of takes you to a different level. It's like those moments you feel that this is what marijuana maybe was made for, to really take these moments and help enhance them. And although I'll always be happy to smoke it anywhere, there's not quite the same feel doing it in Skokie, Illinois, as there is doing it on a rooftop in San Diego, watching the ocean roll in and the sun set. And for those of you who haven't done that lately, let me suggest that is something that is well worth doing, and it does help you get away for a week and relax and unwind. So I think that we've addressed this issue for enough today. People will have plenty of stuff to go and think about. Hopefully they will think about it in a positive way, and think for ways that we can all as a society better ourselves and better the world, and show guys like Putin that we don't really care about him, and that he can't take over just because he looks good on a horse with no shirt. So we'll see where we go with that. We've got some great shows coming up in the future. We are going to talk about this Dead show from Philly in early April. We have some very, very interesting guests. One or two of them from inside the Dead family. Again, we're not going to drop names yet until we know exactly when and how we're going to have these people on. But please stay tuned to the Deadhead Cannabis Show, future episodes, and we will not disappoint in that regard. Rob, I got to tell you, thank you for suggesting this topic today. It's a little bit different from us to focus on one song as opposed to a particular show, but I think that it was both timely and there's probably very few songs in the Dead's repertoire that have the same meaning and impact that Morning Dew does, and it makes it a very, very appropriate topic for this type of format.
Yeah, thanks. A bit more emotional than I expected.
That's what nuclear war will do to you, unfortunately, and and Jerry Garcia can do it to you on a beautiful night as well. So, having said all of that, and as we head out here, I'm going to say my goodbyes, and I'm going to turn the show over to Rob so he can introduce the closing moments of perhaps the greatest Morning Dew of all time, from what many people consider perhaps the greatest Grateful Dead show of all time. To everyone, this is Larry Mishkin. Thank you so much for listening. I look forward to talking to you all next week. Enjoy your marijuana and cannabis responsibly. Rob, it's all you.
Thank you. And we're going to close this with a nice big clip from 5877 Barton Hall in Ithaca, New York, on the campus of Cornell University. It is the legend, the show that everybody's always had. One that very rarely listen to anymore because we've all listened to it so many times. But this dew is the dew to end all dews. And with that, I'm Rob Hunt, and I stand with Ukraine.